I came home earlier than usual that afternoon. The sun was still hanging low, casting golden light across the quiet neighborhood. I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked from the outside. But inside me, there was a strange heaviness I couldn't explain. As I stepped into the house, I noticed the silence, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, too heavy for a home that usually hummed with life. I set my keys down on the counter, waiting for the sound of footsteps. No one came. I called her name, but there was no reply. Then I heard a faint laugh from upstairs. It wasn't the kind of laugh I knew. It was sharper, more playful, not meant for me. I froze where I stood, every instinct telling me something was wrong. Slowly, I climbed the stairs. Each creak of the wood felt like it echoed through my chest. The bedroom door was halfway open. I could see shadows moving inside. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. I pushed the door gently with my hand, and then I saw her. My wife, in the arms of another man. The world stopped. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. She turned her head and saw me. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. The man quickly let go of her, fumbling for his shirt, but I couldn't move. I stood frozen, staring at the betrayal unfolding before me. She whispered my name, but it sounded like a stranger's voice. I stepped back, my knees weak. The room spun around me. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just left. My feet carried me out of the house without direction. I walked down the street, barely noticing where I was going. My chest burned with pain I couldn't describe. I felt like someone had ripped the ground out from under me. The world I thought I knew no longer existed. I sat on a park bench nearby. I buried my face in my hands. Tears came, heavy and unstoppable. People walked by, but no one asked if I was okay. I guess heartbreak doesn't always show on the surface. But inside, I was shattered. Memories of our years together flooded my mind. Our wedding day, the first house we bought. The late-night talks when we planned our future. It all felt like lies now. Like pages from a book that had been rewritten without my knowing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, but I just sat there, paralyzed. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound I had ever felt. I thought of the vows we made, the promises whispered under the stars. And I wondered, did they mean nothing to her? I stayed on that bench until the sun began to set. I didn't want to go back home. I couldn't bear to step into that house again, so I walked, block after block. I let my legs carry me through the city. The streets blurred, the lights flickered past me. I felt like a ghost drifting among the living. And for the first time in my life, I questioned everything. Who was I, if not her husband? What was my worth, if love could be so easily thrown away? The questions circled endlessly in my head, each one more painful than the last. That night, I slept in my car. I couldn't face her. I couldn't face myself. The seat was uncomfortable, the air was cold, but at least I was away from the lies. When morning came, I stared at the sunrise through the windshield. It was beautiful, but it didn't reach me. The colors painted the sky, but my world was still gray. I felt hollow inside, like a part of me had died the night before. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to move forward. But I knew one thing, my life would never be the same again. I drove aimlessly for hours. The road stretched endlessly before me. Every familiar street now felt foreign, tainted by betrayal. I stopped at a diner, hoping a cup of coffee might steady me. But even the smell of food turned my stomach. I sat there, staring at the table, feeling like a shell of a man. The waitress asked if I was okay. I forced a smile and lied, saying I was fine, but I wasn't fine. I was broken. I thought about calling a friend. But what would I say? How do you tell someone your wife has destroyed your world? I didn't want pity. I didn't want advice. I just wanted the pain to stop. I drove past our favorite spots. The little bookstore where she used to drag me in on weekends. The park where we once had picnics in the summer. Each place was a dagger in my heart. Memories had turned into weapons. I pulled over by the lake. I sat by the water, staring at the reflection of the sky. I felt like I was staring at a man I no longer knew. The man in the reflection was older, more tired. His eyes carried a sadness too heavy to hide. I whispered to myself, "What now?" but there was no answer. Only silence, broken by the soft ripple of water. The world kept turning, even as mine had stopped. People jogged past me, couples held hands. Life went on for them, but for me, it had ended. I thought about the years I had given her, the sacrifices I made, the dreams we built together. And now, it was all gone. I clenched my fists, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. Were there signs I had ignored? Had I been too blind, too trusting? The questions haunted me. I felt like I was drowning in them. I stayed by that lake until the stars appeared. And even then, I couldn't bring myself to leave. The night was cold, but it matched the emptiness inside me. I closed my eyes, praying for sleep, praying for the pain to fade, even if just for a moment. But the memories wouldn't let me rest. They replayed in my head like a cruel movie, her laugh, his hands on her, the look on her face when she saw me. I wished I could erase it all, but I couldn't. I knew those images would follow me for the rest of my life. And for the first time, I wondered if I would ever heal. I woke up stiff and cold in the driver's seat. The sunrise didn't feel like hope, it felt like a cruel reminder that the world kept moving. I drove back to the house, though every mile felt like walking into fire. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car was still there. For a long moment, I couldn't get out. Part of me wanted to just keep driving and never look back. But another part needed answers. I stepped inside. The smell of her perfume still lingered in the air. She was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want lies. I saw enough. I told her. Her lips trembled. She whispered my name again, softer this time. I shook my head. Why? I asked. It was the only word I could form. She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed. But her tears gave me no comfort. They felt like too little, too late. She said it was a mistake. She said she didn't mean for it to happen, but the images in my mind told me otherwise. Mistakes don't last long enough to leave scars like this. I turned away, unable to look at her. I packed a bag. Just a few clothes, some essentials. She followed me up the stairs, begging me to stay. Her voice cracked with desperation, but I couldn't listen anymore. Each word felt like salt in an open wound. I zipped up the bag and walked past her. Her hand reached for mine, but I pulled away. The look on her face almost broke me, almost, but the pain was stronger than any love left inside me. I walked out the door, the sound of her crying echoing behind me. It felt like a death, like I was burying the life we once shared. But I didn't stop walking. I couldn't. I rented a small apartment across town. The walls were bare, the rooms empty. It was nothing like the home we had built together. But at least it was mine. At night, the loneliness pressed down on me. The silence felt unbearable. I tried turning on the TV just to drown it out. But nothing filled the void. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I replayed that moment in my head over and over. It haunted me like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Days blurred into nights, nights into days. I stopped counting how long it had been. Friends called, but I ignored them. I didn't know how to explain what had happened. I didn't want their pity. I wanted answers I would never get. Sometimes, I caught myself reaching for the phone to call her. But I stopped every time. What was there left to say? Her silence was louder than any words. I stared at the ceiling at night, asking myself where I went wrong. Had I failed her somehow? Was I not enough? The self-doubt was worse than the anger. It chewed at me from the inside. I felt myself fading into someone I didn't recognize. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and saw a broken man staring back, and I realized I had to choose. Stay buried in the past or start building a new future. The thought terrified me, but it also sparked something deep inside. A faint whisper of strength I thought I'd lost. That night, I wrote down 3 words on a piece of paper, "Find myself again," and for the first time since that day, I felt like maybe I could. The next morning, I forced myself to get out of bed. The air felt heavy, but I moved anyway. I made coffee, though it tasted bitter on my tongue. It wasn't about the taste. It was about proving to myself that I could still function. I opened the blinds and let the sunlight in. For weeks, I had hidden from it, but that day, I faced it. I sat by the window, watching people pass by. They looked so normal, so untouched by heartbreak. I envied them, but I also wondered had they suffered too. Maybe everyone carried unseen scars. I thought about calling my brother. We hadn't spoken in months, pride had kept us apart. But I picked up the phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I almost hung up. But instead, I said, I need to talk. He didn't hesitate. Come over, he said. So I did. His house was warm, filled with noise and family. The smell of dinner cooking hit me as soon as I walked in. It felt like stepping into another world. He hugged me, even though I resisted at first. And just like that, the walls I built around myself began to crack. We sat at the table, and I told him everything. Every detail, every tear. His eyes were heavy with sympathy. But he didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he said something simple. She broke her vows. You didn't. Those words stuck with me. For the first time, I felt like maybe it wasn't all my fault. I stayed the night at his house. The sound of his kids laughing in the next room gave me a strange comfort. Life went on, and maybe mine could too. The following week, I signed up for a community class. It was about woodworking, something I had always wanted to try. The first day, I felt nervous walking in. Everyone seemed to know each other, but then, an older man smiled at me. First time, he asked. I nodded. He showed me around, explaining the tools. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about her. I was focused on the wood in my hands, the smell of sawdust, the steady rhythm of work. It felt grounding, like I was building more than just a chair or a shelf. I was building pieces of myself back together. Week after week, I returned. The group became like a small family. We laughed, we shared stories, we worked side by side. I realized healing didn't come all at once, it came in small, steady steps. One day, after class, I walked by the lake again. This time, it felt different. I wasn't drowning anymore, I was breathing. The water shimmered under the setting sun, and I smiled, a real smile, not forced, not broken. For the first time, hope didn't feel impossible. I knew I still had a long way to go. The wounds were deep, but they were starting to close. And with every day that passed, I felt a little stronger. A little more alive. I whispered to myself, I'm still here. And that was enough. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I built a new routine. I woke up early, made coffee, and wrote in a journal. I poured my thoughts onto paper, raw and unfiltered. Some entries were angry, some were filled with sorrow. But little by little, the pages showed signs of healing. I realized that writing helped me process the chaos inside. One evening, I sat on my balcony, looking at the stars. I remembered how she and I once used to lie in the grass, naming constellations. The memory still stung, but it didn't crush me anymore. Instead, I let it drift away like a cloud. My brother called often, checking in. His simple, "How are you holding up?" meant more than he knew. Sometimes I answered honestly. Sometimes I lied and said I was fine, but I was learning that both were okay. One Saturday, I went to the farmer's market downtown. The air smelled of fresh bread and flowers. Music played from a street performer nearby. I walked among the crowd, anonymous yet connected. And then, I saw her, not my wife, an old friend from high school. Her name was Linda. She recognized me instantly. We hadn't spoken in decades. She smiled warmly, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. We talked, catching up on lost years. Her laughter was kind, not mocking. She didn't ask about the pain in my eyes. Instead, she reminded me of who I used to be. When we parted, she said, "Don't disappear again." Her words lingered with me. I realized I had let heartbreak make me vanish from my own life. But maybe, just maybe, I could return. The following weeks, I saw Linda more often. Sometimes at the market, sometimes for coffee. We didn't talk about the past much, we just enjoyed the present. It felt refreshing, like breathing clean air after a storm. One night, I admitted to her what had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the nights in my car. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine. And when I finished, she didn't offer empty words. She just said, "You deserved better." Those 3 words pierced through the fog inside me. For so long, I had blamed myself. But maybe it wasn't all my fault, maybe I had been enough. I left that night with a lighter heart. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. I started cooking again. The kitchen, once filled with silence, now smelled of garlic and onions. I found joy in simple meals, in feeding myself with care. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. I even laughed at a comedy show on TV. The sound startled me at first. It had been so long since laughter felt real, but it reminded me joy wasn't gone forever. It was waiting for me, patiently, like an old friend. And when I lay down to sleep that night, I didn't cry. I didn't drown in memories. I just closed my eyes and dreamed of tomorrow. The seasons began to change, leaves turned golden, the air grew crisp. I found myself walking more, enjoying the quiet streets. Each step felt like proof that I was still moving forward. Sometimes I passed couples holding hands. It stung, but it didn't break me anymore. I reminded myself that love still existed, even if mine had been broken. One afternoon, I visited the library. I hadn't been in years. The smell of old books hit me, warm and familiar. I wandered the aisles without purpose. A title caught my eye, Starting Over After Loss. I checked it out, and that night, I read until dawn. The words weren't magic, but they were a reminder that I wasn't alone. Others had walked this road before me. And they had survived. Some had even thrived. That thought gave me strength. I underlined a passage: pain is proof that you loved. Healing is proof that you can love again. I carried those words with me. On the hard days, I repeated them like a prayer. On the good days, I believed them fully. Linda and I met again at the market. This time, she handed me a basket of apples. "Bake something," she teased. I laughed, shaking my head. But later that night, I tried. The pie was a disaster, but when I tasted it, I smiled. Because it wasn't about perfection. It was about trying again, about living again. And maybe even about loving again. Weeks turned into months. I was still healing, but the cracks in my heart were closing. I noticed the sun more. I noticed the way rain smelled on the pavement. I noticed life again. One evening, Linda invited me to a community event. Music, food, laughter filled the air. For the first time, I didn't feel out of place. I laughed, I clapped, I sang along. It felt like freedom. After the event, we walked by the river. The city lights shimmered on the water. She looked at me and said, "You're different now." I asked her what she meant. She smiled softly. "You're lighter, like you put something down." Her words stayed with me all night. Maybe I had finally set down the weight of betrayal. Not forgotten it, not excused it, but released it. I looked at myself in the mirror later that night. The man staring back was still scarred. But he wasn't broken anymore. He was standing tall. Breathing deep, living again. And I realized something powerful. My wife had taken a chapter from my life, but she hadn't taken the whole book. The rest was still mine to write, and for the first time, I was ready to write it. The days felt lighter. I started running in the mornings. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and fresh. It made me feel alive. Sometimes I ran past the park. I saw children playing, their laughter echoing. It reminded me that joy still existed. One morning, Linda joined me. She wasn't much of a runner, but she tried. We laughed as we both ran out of breath. It wasn't about distance. It was about being together. Later, we sat on a bench, watching the sunrise. The sky was painted in gold and pink. I whispered, "It's beautiful," she replied. "So are new beginnings." Her words sank deep into me. I realized she was right. Beginnings could be beautiful. Even after endings that hurt so much, I started journaling again. Each page became a small confession, a place where I could untangle my thoughts. I wrote about betrayal. I wrote about healing. And then, I wrote about hope. Hope became a seed in my heart. Every day, it grew stronger. I began to look at the future differently. Not as something stolen, but as something waiting for me. I planned small trips, visited nearby towns. Tried new foods, new hobbies. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was running toward the future, and it felt right. One night, I lit a candle for myself, not for her, not for us, but for me. A symbol that I was alive, and I intended to keep living. I started volunteering at the shelter again. The dogs greeted me with wagging tails. Their joy was pure, unconditional. It healed me in ways words never could. Linda showed up one afternoon with food for the animals. The way she knelt to pet a puppy made my chest ache, not from pain, but from something new. Something I hadn't felt in a long time, a gentle kind of love. One that asked for nothing, but gave everything. We spent more time together. Coffee turned into dinners. Walks turned into long conversations. Laughter became constant, and slowly, my heart opened. Not recklessly, not blindly, but carefully, like a flower turning toward the sun. One evening, Linda reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady. I didn't pull away. I let myself feel it. The softness, the comfort, the promise. And for the first time since my world had fallen apart, I didn't feel like a man rebuilding. I felt like a man beginning again. The nights didn't feel as lonely anymore. Sometimes I caught myself smiling before bed. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was learning to live again. Linda became part of my routine, not in a forced way. But naturally, like breathing, she checked in on me, I checked in on her. And somewhere along the way, we became each other's safe place. We talked about our pasts, her losses, my heartbreak. There was no judgment. Only understanding, only care. One evening, we cooked together. The kitchen was messy, flour everywhere. But we laughed until our sides hurt. It felt like a home again, a real one. Not a house full of silence and lies. This was different. This was honest. And I cherished it. We shared music too. Old records, songs that carried memories. Sometimes sad, sometimes joyful. But always meaningful. She danced once in the living room. Spinning around barefoot, carefree. I watched her, and I realized something. Life didn't end with betrayal. It could begin again with love. I didn't say the words yet, but my heart already knew. I was falling for her, and it felt safe this time. Safe, but also exciting, like the world had given me another chance. We drove to the coast one weekend. The waves crashed against the shore. The salty air filled my lungs. Linda held my arm as we walked along the sand. We didn't need many words. The ocean spoke for us. Its vastness reminded me of life's possibilities. We built a small fire at sunset, roasted marshmallows like children. I hadn't laughed that hard in years. She leaned on my shoulder, and for the first time in so long, I felt at peace, not haunted, not broken, just a whole. I whispered, "Thank you," she asked. "For what?" "For reminding me who I am." Her smile was soft, knowing. She squeezed my hand. And in that moment, I realized healing wasn't just about letting go of pain. It was also about allowing joy back in, even when you thought it was impossible, even when you thought you were too old. Life still had surprises, and love was one of them. As the fire burned low, I looked at her face in the glow. And I knew, the past didn't own me anymore. The future was mine to claim. The drive back from the coast felt different. The road seemed brighter. Even the small towns we passed looked alive. Linda sang softly along with the radio. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. I caught myself staring at her when we stopped at a red light. She laughed and said, "Eyes on the road." It was the kind of laugh that healed wounds, the kind that filled the silence with warmth. At home, I slept deeply that night. No nightmares. No replaying of betrayal. Just rest, the kind I hadn't felt in years. In the mornings, coffee smelled sweeter. Even the paper didn't feel as heavy with bad news. I realized something. Healing was sneaky. It happened in small, ordinary moments, moments you don't notice until you look back. Linda and I never rushed. There were no labels at first. Just connection, just presence, and it was enough. I started fixing up my house again. Fresh paint on the porch. New flowers in the garden. Life creeping back into the walls. She helped me choose colors. We argued playfully over curtains. It wasn't about the curtains. It was about building something together, piece by piece. We had dinner at a little diner once. The waitress teased us about being a cute couple. Linda blushed. I chuckled, but inside, my heart skipped. A couple. It sounded right. It felt right. Driving home, I asked her how she felt about us. She took a long breath. Then she said, safe and happy. That was all I needed. I told her I felt the same. She reached for my hand. The world outside the window blurred, but that moment was crystal clear. We were no longer just two people surviving. We were two souls choosing to live again, and it was enough, more than enough. As days turned into weeks, I realized I wasn't just moving on. I was moving forward. There's a difference. Moving on means forgetting. Moving forward means growing. I wasn't erasing the past. I was learning from it, and with Linda by my side, the lessons didn't feel like chains anymore. They felt like wings. One evening, Linda brought me an old photo album. She wanted to show me her life before we met, her childhood, her late husband, her travels. Each page carried stories, laughter, and tears. I listened, holding her hand. The past was not something to erase. It was something to honor, and sharing it brought us closer. I showed her my own albums too, pictures of my wedding, my kids, the life I thought I'd keep forever. I expected pain to resurface, and it did, a little. But instead of breaking me, it softened me. She didn't judge, she didn't flinch. She just said, that was part of your journey. Her words wrapped around my heart, and I realized she was right. Every step, even the painful ones, had led me here, to this living room, here, to this new chance. We closed the album. But we opened a new chapter, together. We weren't running from our pasts, we were carrying them gently into our future. And that made all the difference. The seasons changed, spring arrived. Flowers bloomed in the garden we planted, birds returned to the trees. And inside me, something bloomed too, hope, pure and undeniable. One night, under the stars, I told her I loved her. It slipped out softly, but with all my truth. She froze for a moment, then she smiled, her eyes shining. I love you too, she whispered. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a movie scene. It was real, and that made it perfect. We kissed, slow and certain. The world didn't need to know. The stars didn't need to witness. It was enough that we knew. Enough that we felt it. From that night forward, everything shifted. Not suddenly, but steadily. Life grew brighter. Meals tasted better. Even the silence felt comforting. I understood something then. Love after betrayal wasn't just possible. It was stronger, because it grew from ashes. Because it demanded courage, and because it taught me that endings were sometimes beginnings in disguise. We spent a quiet Sunday morning together. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. I noticed how natural it felt to be near her. Not a trace of fear or doubt, just calm and belonging. We shared coffee and small talk, the kind that builds trust and comfort. Her laugh was my favorite sound, and I told her so. She teased me, calling me sentimental, but I didn't care. I wanted to say it, to mean it. We walked through the neighborhood park. Children ran past us, carefree, dogs barked, tails wagging. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary. I felt alive, truly alive. The world no longer seemed heavy. I carried no bitterness, just lessons learned. I stopped at the old bridge. The water sparkled beneath us. I held her hand tightly. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I whispered, I'm glad I'm here. She squeezed my hand back. And I felt it, a sense of home, not a house, not a past, but a heart, a life rebuilt, a love rediscovered. Weeks later, I decided to call my wife. Not to reconcile, not to reopen wounds, but to tell her I forgave her. Forgiveness, I realized, was for me, not her. It lightened the load I had carried for too long. She was shocked. We spoke briefly. No blame, no bitterness. Just honesty and closure. I hung up feeling free. And that evening, I cooked dinner for Linda. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic. We ate, sharing stories of the day. I laughed without restraint. And when I looked at her, I saw the reflection of the man I once feared I'd lost. Alive, whole, open. The night grew late, and we watched the stars together. I told her about the dreams I had begun to imagine again. Travel, friends, a home filled with laughter. And she encouraged me. We planned small adventures together. And for the first time, the word future felt safe. Not uncertain, not threatening, but inviting. Life had given me a second chance, and I intended to live it fully. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew. I went for a long walk, letting my thoughts wander freely. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by betrayal. Instead, I felt curiosity about life, love, and what lay ahead. I passed a small cafe and decided to stop. Linda joined me, smiling as always. We ordered tea and sat by the window. People walked by, some rushing, some leisurely. It reminded me how fleeting moments are, how important it is to cherish them. I held her hand across the table, the warmth spread through me. We talked about dreams we'd postponed, places we wanted to visit, books we wanted to read, songs we wanted to hear. I realized joy was in these small exchanges. Not grand gestures, not perfection, just being present. She laughed at my attempt to pronounce a French bakery item. I laughed too, at my own embarrassment. It felt safe to be imperfect around her, to be human. The world outside the cafe continued in chaos, but inside, we found our own peace. I had built a new rhythm, a new life, and it felt promising. Weeks passed. I began painting again, brush in hand, colors flowing freely. The canvas became a mirror of my heart. Vivid blues for hope, soft yellows for contentment, and occasional reds for the lingering pain. Linda often watched silently, then she offered a gentle critique. I realized art was another way of healing, of expressing what words couldn't. We took a short road trip to a nearby town. The scenery was breathtaking, mountains in the distance, rivers winding below. We hiked trails, sometimes speaking, sometimes quiet. The silence was comforting, not awkward, it was shared. A language of trust and understanding. That night, under the stars, I felt truly free. Not just from heartbreak, but from fear. The chains of doubt were gone. I understood that life would always carry challenges. But with someone by your side, they were lighter. And maybe, love after pain was even stronger than before. Because it was chosen, not given blindly. And that made it precious. The first snow arrived that year. I watched the flakes fall softly from the window. Linda held a cup of cocoa in her hands. We watched in silence, content. The world seemed quieter under the snow, peaceful. I felt gratitude swelling inside me. For life, for second chances, for love, we decided to build a small snowman in the yard. Children from the neighborhood joined us. Laughter filled the air. I hadn't felt this alive in years. The weight of betrayal seemed distant, almost unreal. I realized healing is like snow, slow, gentle, transformative. Each flake a small moment of progress. By the time evening arrived, we were tired but happy. Our cheeks red from cold, our hearts warm. I looked at Linda, her eyes sparkled. And I whispered, "I am grateful for you." She smiled softly, resting her head on my shoulder. We stayed like that, watching the snowfall, and I knew that life had given me a true gift. Not wealth, not fame, but the chance to rebuild, to love again. To live fully. I began thinking about the future. Not with fear, but with excitement. The past had taught me resilience, the present taught me joy. And the future promised endless possibilities. In spring, we planted a small vegetable garden. Tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, it was our project together. Every seed we planted felt symbolic: growth, patience, care. Even when some plants failed, we laughed and tried again. I started inviting friends over, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. I realized I had built not just a relationship, but a life, one rich with love and human connection. Linda and I often sat in the garden at sunset. We talked about everything and nothing. The simplicity was magical. It was proof that happiness doesn't need grand gestures. Just presence, understanding, and choice. I reflected on my past marriage. The betrayal had been devastating. But it had led me here, to growth, to clarity, to love that was chosen consciously. One evening, I held Linda's hand and said, "I am proud of us." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. No words needed. We shared a quiet moment, knowing we had both found home in each other. I smiled, feeling content, whole, and ready for whatever came next. Summer came with warm evenings and long days. Linda and I spent hours sitting on the porch swing. We watched fireflies dance in the yard, The air smelled of cut grass and blooming flowers. It felt like life had slowed down, just for us. We hosted a small barbecue for neighbors, laughter and music filled the night. For the first time, my house felt like a true home, not a place of memories and ghosts, but a place of joy. I realized something important that evening. Community heals too. Being surrounded by kind souls reminded me that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Linda fit in effortlessly. Her warmth drew people to her. And seeing her among friends made me proud. Proud that she was part of my life. Later, as we cleaned up, I looked at her. And I whispered, "This is the life I always wanted." She smiled knowingly. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was in her eyes. I no longer defined myself by betrayal. I defined myself by the love I chose now, and it changed everything. We planned a small trip for our anniversary together. Just a weekend away, but it felt special, a celebration of survival, growth, and renewal. I packed light, because truly, all I needed was her. The journey itself was beautiful, open roads, golden fields, endless sky. We arrived at a cozy cabin near the lake. The water shimmered under the sunlight, birds sang in the distance. The world felt still, peaceful. We spent the days hiking, talking, laughing. At night, we lit a fire and shared wine. I told her things I had never said aloud. My fears, my regrets, my hopes. She listened with patience and love. Then she shared her own truths. It bonded us even deeper. On the final night, I looked at the stars above. And I realized something profound. Life had broken me once. But it had also rebuilt me stronger. Because I chose to keep going. Because I chose love again. I turned to her, my heart full, and I said, "You are my second chance." Her eyes filled with tears. She kissed me softly and whispered, "And you are mine." The fire crackled, the stars burned bright. And I knew, without doubt, that this was where I belonged. Not in the past, not in the pain, but here. In love, in life, in hope. Autumn returned, painting the trees gold and red. The crisp air carried a sense of change. Linda and I took long walks through the park. Leaves crunched beneath our feet. Children played, tossing handfuls of color into the wind. I felt time passing gently, not harshly, a reminder that every season holds beauty. Even endings can be beautiful. We stopped by a farmer's market, bought apples, cinnamon, and fresh bread. Back home, we baked a pie together. The kitchen smelled like comfort. I thought of my old life briefly, the betrayal, the loneliness. But it no longer had power over me. It was just a chapter one had finished reading. And now, I was writing a new one. One filled with peace, one filled with love. I looked at Linda as she rolled the dough. Her hands steady, her smile soft, and I thought, this is what home looks like, not walls. Not possessions, but hearts that choose each other. Every single day, the pie burned a little at the edges. We laughed until tears rolled down our faces. It wasn't about perfection. It was about joy, simple, unshakable joy. That evening, we ate the pie by the fire, and I knew I would never take another moment for granted. Later that week, I wrote in my journal. I hadn't done that in years. The words came slowly at first. Then like a river breaking through a dam. I wrote about betrayal. I wrote about healing. I wrote about love's return. And as I closed the notebook, I realized I no longer needed to carry the weight of the past. It had shaped me, yes, but it did not define me. I was defined by the choices I made now. By the love I gave and received today. Linda found the journal on the table. She didn't read it. She just smiled and placed a flower on top of it, a gesture of respect. A gesture of care. I felt seen. I felt understood. And I knew then, this was not just a second chance. It was the life I was meant to have all along, one built on truth, one built on resilience, one built on love. The morning light found us sitting quietly on the porch, hands intertwined. I felt a calm that had been absent for years. Linda hummed a tune I had grown to love. We drank our coffee slowly, savoring the ordinary miracle of warmth. Neighbors waved as they passed by, and I waved back with genuine ease. The past no longer lurked in every corner of my mind. Instead, I made plans for small joys and ordinary pleasures. We decided to repaint the kitchen together, choosing soft, hopeful colors. Each brushstroke felt like a gentle repair to the soul. I found myself telling stories I had locked away for too long. She listened with patience, never interrupting the jagged edges of my memory. In turn, she shared quiet dreams she had saved for someone brave. We learned how to build a life without rushing or forcing. Evenings were for books and soft music, not for silence and suspicion. On rainy afternoons, we sat by the window and watched the world wash itself clean. I started mentoring at the community center, sharing small lessons from my life. The act of helping others made my own losses feel less sharp. Friends came over more often, filling the rooms with laughter. At night, I wrote in my journal, grateful for the steady heart within me. We planted new flowers by the walkway and watched bees do their quiet work. Little rituals anchored us, a shared slice of pie, a walk at dusk. I reconnected with my brother, and our conversations were gentler this time. We spoke of past mistakes without shame, just honest reflection. Linda and I began hosting a monthly dinner for people who lived alone. The table grew crowded, but it felt right to share bread and stories. One afternoon, she surprised me with tickets to a city exhibit I had wanted to see. We walked the gallery hand in hand, pointing out colors and memory. Standing beside her, I felt rich in ways money never bought. We both forgave ourselves for the things we could not change. Forgiveness softened the edges of pain until they were bearable. I invited my ex-wife to a conversation long overdue, and we spoke calmly. There was no reconciliation of the past, only a mutual wish for peace. That closing felt like setting down a heavy sack I had carried alone. The seasons eased on, and with them came small celebrations. We marked our first autumn together by baking pies with neighbors. Children ran circles, and their joy rubbed off on everyone present. I watched Linda with a new kind of admiration in my chest. She had been a light that arrived when I was ready to see it. We spent an evening teaching a niece how to make her first scrapbook. Her delighted grin reminded me that tenderness could be simple and abundant. I opened my journal years later and read the pages that used to ache. The words no longer felt like wounds, but lessons written in ink. Sometimes I would pause and thank the lonely nights for leading me here. We planned a modest trip to visit a small coastal town we both loved. Walking on the shore, we made promises not of perfection, but of presence. I realized love now meant choosing each other again and again. The community accepted us with warm, ordinary kindness. One winter evening, we hosted a small concert for local musicians. Their songs filled the house and stitched new seams where old ones had torn. Linda and I danced in the kitchen with no music but our breathing. Those private dances felt sacred, small vows in motion. Spring returned, and with it a feeling of renewal I could name. We planted a new row of herbs and watched them reach for sun. I found myself smiling at tasks I once dreaded: laundry, bills, errands. Responsibility became a companion rather than a burden. Sometimes I would simply look at her and be astonished at the calm in my chest. We exchanged small gifts: a book, a hand-knitted scarf, a thoughtful postcard. Gifts were no longer about filling emptiness, but about noticing each other. One evening, surrounded by friends, we announced our intention to marry. There was no grand spectacle, only close faces and warm embraces. We kept the ceremony small, held in the garden we had tended together. Vows were simple and honest, with laughter breaking through the solemn moments. When I said, "I choose you," it felt like completing a journey rather than starting one. Her eyes shone with tears, and I knew the future was our mutual promise. Afterward, neighbors offered pies and flowers, and we ate under string lights. The sky was generous that night, and stars seemed to bless the table. In the months that followed, our days continued in friendly rhythm. We traveled to places that felt like pages from a long-held dream. We learned to be surprised by joy even in quiet, domestic moments. Sometimes I would sit alone and reflect on how pain had reshaped me. I would tell myself that sadness had been a sculptor, harsh but honest. The man I had become was softer, yes, but also more solid at his core. Linda's presence taught me the vocabulary of steady love and repair. Our home became a place where people felt welcome to be themselves. We hosted book clubs and small art gatherings that brightened dull weeks. Neighbors left bread on our porch and notes of thanks for the dinners. I helped a young man at the center rebuild his life, and in doing so, healed a part of mine. We sometimes sat in silence, comfortable with the spaces between words. Silence was no longer charged, it was companionable and kind. On an ordinary Tuesday, she surprised me with a handwritten letter. Her words reminded me why I had chosen to open my heart again. We aged together, not always gracefully, but always lovingly. Lines formed at the corners of our eyes, maps of laughter and sorrow both. We promised to keep saying I'm sorry and thank you without pride. Gratitude became the steady flame that kept our household warm. Whenever doubts crept in, we returned to small acts of care. Making tea, clearing dishes, rubbing a tired shoulder, these were our vows. Years later, I found my journal tucked under a stack of photos. Reading those entries, I felt proud of the man who kept trying. I had not erased the past, but I had learned to live beside it with grace. We sat one evening watching the sunset paint the sky like forgiveness. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I knew I was exactly where I belonged. We celebrated a quiet anniversary with old friends and new stories. The night was full of toasts, not to perfection, but to endurance. I raised my glass and thought of the long road to that table. There were no dramatic endings, only steady continuations. Linda squeezed my hand and mouthed, "Thank you," across the noise. I mouthed back, "For being my home." We both laughed until we had no air left and then laughed again. In the months that followed, we faced small hardships with a practiced calm. Health scares, bills, days when worries seemed large but manageable together. We met each challenge with honesty and a plan, not with fear alone. Our community offered help without judgment, simply human to human. I found joy in the routine of Sunday pancakes and weekday gardening. A neighbor's child once called me uncle, and my chest swelled with quiet pride. We taught the child to plant seeds and to be patient with soil. I realized my life had widened into something generous and outward-facing. One morning I returned to the old bookstore and found a familiar title. I bought it and left it on a bench with a note for someone who might need it. Small acts of kindness became the currency of my healing. Linda and I built rituals that bound ordinary days into meaning. We tended to the garden, to friends, to the small library of our home. Sometimes we argued quietly and then made up with better listening. Our conflicts no longer left scars, they left stitches. I forgave myself daily for whatever I had failed to see or to be. And in forgiving myself, I grew kinder in other ways. We renewed friendships that had frayed and made peace with those who could not reconcile. Walking through years hand in hand taught me that time does not erase trauma, but it reshapes it. Trauma becomes a contour of the landscape rather than the whole map. I taught workshops at the Center on Resilience and the Art of Beginning Again. Sharing my story felt less like exposing wounds and more like offering a lantern. People came up to me afterward to say, "Your story helped me." Those words felt like repayment for the nights I thought I would never see daylight. We marked each year not by grand gestures, but by the accumulation of small mercies. On a soft summer morning, Linda and I sat with tea and a stack of old photos. We traced the edges of faces that had been part of our journey. Some names were gone from our lives, others remained with new roles. I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had led me to that quiet table. We promised to keep living deliberately, to keep choosing each other daily. And in that promise, I found my final, steady answer.